Welcome back to What's the Point Anyway? I'm Luke, your host, and thanks for joining me. Today's episode's another really difficult one, to be honest. My guest, Jen, grew up in pretty horrific circumstances. Basically, her family sold her off into child sex abuse and slavery. She has a pretty popular X account where she's told stories of her involvement in things like Jeff Epstein and Epstein Island, like hundreds of others who have claimed to be victims of this. Their stories, they still remain alleged victims, really, because they haven't received any justice for it. And given the power of those that are involved, their stories are more or less shut down. Jen's on the front foot, really trying to tell her story and trying to bring awareness to this. Given the so-called release of these Epstein files, over the last month or so, I thought it's a really interesting topic that, I mean, it blows my mind. It still continues to blow my mind, and I think there's a lot of other people in a similar situation as me. So it was great to bring Jen on and have her tell her story and help us to understand what on earth is going on with these sorts of things. To note, again, it's a really challenging and difficult subject. So please be aware as you listen to this episode that there's definitely going to be things that are triggering. Just a note as well, thanks to everyone who does tune into this podcast. I just self-fund this thing. I don't do any ads. I do it in my spare time. So I really appreciate people listening. If you do enjoy it, please hit subscribe, hit like, share the episode with a friend. It goes a long way to getting the episodes out there if it is indeed giving you value. Thanks and enjoy the show. Whereabouts are you based?
I live in Maryland right now, but I grew up in New York.
Yeah, nice one. Well, thanks for joining me. I came across your story on X, and you've got quite a big following there. Crazy story, which we'll get into. I'm looking forward to hearing it. I thought it's poignant given the, I guess, headlines, but I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about the whole sort of Epstein files being released this week. But before we get into that, where have you gotten to today? What's the point anyway?
Well, right now I'm currently advocating to combat child trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
I was adopted as an infant by a couple who sold me throughout my childhood. I have been to Epstein Island and on multiple Lolita Express types of flights as a child. After I went public, Child Protective Services opened a substance exposed newborn case, even though all tests came back negative. And they told me that if I didn't stop posting on social media, I would never see my daughter again. I began to put together how I was adopted as an infant and trafficked to Epstein's ilk, how many other children who have been through the CPS foster and adoption industries have also been trafficked among the upper echelons of society. Um, this enraged CPS, and they essentially blackmailed my husband into filing a police report against me. And I spent almost a year and a half political prisoner with no trial, and all charges were essentially dropped after about a year and a half. I then had to spend about another year in a halfway house. And since then, I've been doing everything in my power to build awareness to how often the CPS, foster and adoption industries intentionally places children in abusive situations. Very frequently, for example, right now we have anywhere between 500 and 900,000 children missing through the United States child welfare system at this moment. And we know that at least half of the children who end up in the CPS foster and adoption industries end up being molested in some form. So the question is, where did these, 500,000 to almost 1 million children go?
How long ago was it that you came out and went through that initial experience of trying to be shut down?
I went public. I went public on October 23rd, 2017.
Okay, so you're about 8 years into it.
Roughly about 7, 8 years, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, if you don't mind me asking, how old were you at that point when you came out, and what was the process like going from being someone that had been raised in this to then trying to fight against it?
I was about 30 when I came public.
Hmm.
Pretty much the process for me was I had been dealing with what I thought were daydreams. I would randomly, zone out and not, and I didn't really understand it. It was weird. I didn't understand it until the Podesta WikiLeaks happened in 2016.
Hmm.
That made me realize that these random daydreams I was having were actually like flashbacks at locations and things that actually happened. And then I ended up having to combat with myself. Do I keep this private? Do I just try and move on with my life and just try and live a normal life? Or do I try to build awareness to this and go public and try and get other survivors to come forward? I spent almost a month just kind of writing up, my little thing, I guess my confessional or whatever. Spent about a month writing it up. And then at one point, one night, I was just like, you know what? If I don't post this now, I'm never going to post it. If I keep trying to edit to make it perfect, it's never going to be perfect. It's never going to say everything I wanted to say. So I'm going to just look over it in the morning and I'm going to post it tomorrow morning. And the next morning I posted it. And honestly, I thought that I was going to be ridiculed, berated, laughed at. I thought I was going to be shunned. And the complete opposite happened.
Mm.
There was such an outpouring of support and empathy and people wanting asking genuine questions and wanting to know more and wanting to understand more and all that kind of stuff. And then 5 days later, a certain anonymous poster started posting on the internet, and a whole community was born of people looking into this kind of stuff. And it just became a situation of, well, the cat's out of the bag now. It's not like I can go back hide under a rock. So let's keep going full throttle.
Yeah. And what was just to jump in for those that don't know, what were could you explain what the Podesta WikiLeaks situation was?
Yes, there was a situation at the Democratic National Committee where an inside staffer known as Seth Rich had access to a bunch of internal emails and he leaked them to WikiLeaks.
Hmm.
And these emails contain information showing that not only was the Democrat National Committee trying to help Hillary Clinton win the nomination over Bernie Sanders, it also had a very substantial series of emails that used code words that, if run side by side with the FBI pedophile code word database, you could see that the emails were very likely referencing pedophilia acts.
And what was that? I mean, that was not something that really hit the news stories at all, but it did. I know it started to come out in, sort of online communities, whether that was Twitter at the time or, Reddit and everything else. How many people like you were there? Like, were you one of many that started to speak up saying, hey, I was a victim of this?
Um, Not really. At the time, I only knew of a handful. And then shortly before, and the ones that I knew of were like Annika Lucas, Kathy O'Brien. I think Whitney Webb was public at the time. So,
Hmm.
like, I knew of them, but I didn't know them. And then shortly before I was held political prisoner, there was Eliza Blue and another person who started posting and all that happened. But then I was held political prisoner for about a year and a half, came out, and then when I came out, initially, I had to stay in the halfway house for a year, so it was very limited in what I could do and all that kind of stuff. But when I came out and I was able to get on Truth Social initially, then I was able to get on X because Twitter, I was, very nervous about. And I
Hmm.
realized that there was quite a bit of a community at this point on X of survivors who are coming forward and who are speaking.
Yeah,
So that's been very bittersweet to see. It's great to see they're standing up, but it sucks to see that there are others who went
there's
through it.
so many. Yeah, yeah. And what was the eventual fate of Seth Rich, the guy that leaked it?
From what I understand, Seth Rich was actually assassinated in DC.
Yeah, yeah, right. So I've heard this story before of other victims of child sex abuse that if you're looking at this like normally, you're like, how could these things happen and you have no memory of it? But it seems to be fairly common that the human body has some sort of response where it creates like a amnesia effect where you have no memory of all these things that happened, but then certain things can happen later in life that trigger those memories. What was it like for you? You said it happened when you were sort of 30 years old. Like a few years before that, before you start to have the triggers of the memories, how would have you described your childhood? Like, did you remember any of it, or was there parts that were blurs? Like, what did you think about what your life was up until that point?
I thought that other than my dad being an asshole, I
Mhm,
thought that my childhood was overall normal. It looked like normal on the outside, other than other than the fact that, I knew I had behavioral issues in second grade, that they got very severe in second grade.
mhm,
They started pumping me, full of pills. There was one point that I was on, like 15 pills at a time. So, and then I was moved from public school to a school for children with behavioral issues. So then I got moved into that in seventh grade and stayed in there until I graduated. So there was also that going on, which also, I realized later that children that are placed into that kind of system often undergo more extensive abuse. So mostly what I remember at this point is from grade school and earlier. Unfortunately, the point that I was moved into seventh grade and later is right now the most fractured.
yeah,
But I remember more of earlier.
yeah. And has it
But
been a
like my day-to-day thing. Sorry, go ahead.
no, no, sorry, you can
Well, my day-to-day structure in early years was I would have therapy 3 times a week. I'd have it on Monday morning, Tuesday morning, and Thursday morning. I would have Hebrew school 3 days a week. I'd have that Monday afternoon, Wednesday afternoon, and Sunday morning. And then when I was much younger, I would spend Friday nights at my uncle's house, who he's the man who arranged my adoption and was very involved in my abuse.
mhm,
He was actually a direct handler for me for quite a while.
yeah,
So overall, on the outside, my life seemed very normal. But later on, when I started realizing that, like, for example, like there's one incident that I've never completely forgotten. Um, I just suppressed. And I remember being in the laundry room, hearing my father upstairs in the kitchen yelling and thinking about one of the blackmail incidents that I witnessed, where to this day, that is the hardest I've ever seen a grown man cry.
yeah,
So there are little teeny tiny bits of slivers that I've remembered, like throughout my years, not like enough to really not enough to really build on until I was older.
yeah. And did you have siblings with your
Yes, I
foster
had
parents?
one
Yeah,
younger brother who was also adopted.
yeah. And do you think he went through the same sorts of things?
He went through some forms of abuse. I don't know exactly what he went through. I know that he went through forms of abuse.
Yeah. And what was the situation with your foster parents? Were they poor and doing things because they needed to get money, or were they part of a sort of wealthier, higher class sect?
On my mother's side, from what I understand, my mother's family came over via Operation Paperclip.
Mhm,
My father's family, from what I understand, I don't know much about my father's mother. My father's father, I was told growing up they had migrated from Poland to the States through Ellis Island. However, it wasn't until a couple of years ago that I found out that he actually came to the United States through Cuba and stole somebody's identity, came up to New York, went to Brooklyn, lived in Brooklyn, where he worked as a mail clerk
yeah. And
or
what
a
was
postman. He was delivering the mail.
yeah. And so your mum came via Operation Paperclip. Can you give some intel on what that on exactly?
Operation Paperclip, from my understanding, was back when the Nazis were defeated and a number of the scientists were brought from Nazi Germany over to the United States.
Mhm.
What a lot of people don't know is that the scientists that were brought over weren't all just Nazis. The Nazis also were fond of taking people of other cultures, religions, races, whatever that they thought showed an exceptional potential and would force them to work for them. So they also had Jews, which was my family. My family was one of those Jewish families that had been
Right.
brought over via Operation Paperclip that had been kept by the Nazis, from my understanding.
Yeah, right, makes sense. Okay, so as this WikiLeaks event happens and you start to piece together your childhood, how has it come about then that, then obviously you had the Epstein, the initial Epstein event. I'm not sure, what was that, like a year or two after that? How did you then realize that you'd been to Epstein Island? What were your experiences with that?
I've always known that I'd been to Epstein Island. I remembered a bunch of the when I went to Epstein Island, I went on a cruise.
Mhm,
So when I went on the cruise, we went there. I believe, if I recall correctly, it was a 7-day cruise where we went on either 4 or 5 days in a row of excursions.
mhm.
One of the islands that we stopped at was Little St. James.
Yeah,
I didn't realize that that was Epstein Island until I believe until the WikiLeaks came out.
yeah,
And then
yeah.
I put it together. I'm not 100% certain, so I apologize if I'm wrong on that.
Mhm,
Around that time, roughly. And that was when I realized that it was Epstein Island. But when I went on the cruise, I went via multiple shore excursions. So unfortunately, I don't remember exactly which happened on which island.
mhm,
However, the majority of what I do remember was abusive in nature. At least two of the island locations that we had stopped at, we were forced to, myself and other children were forced to, we were put in essentially what I call fight rings.
mhm.
And they would make us fight each other until either one of the children was dead or we were told to stop fighting.
Yeah, wow. How old do you think you were at that point?
Well,
Right. So what was it like, was it how did you end up being on an excursion like this? Was it runners, like a school trip, or like how was it you that ended up being one of the ones that was on this trip?
I went with my family.
Right.
So I'd gone with my cousins, uncle, the majority of my mother's side of the family.
Mhm,
So I had gone with that side of the family. The way that the cruise excursions work is that you can either go with it, like, for example, I went on Celebrity. So
mhm.
you can either go through Celebrity cruise lines, and the cruise line will take you to the island via whatever method they use, or you can go on your own and you can go separately. I don't know if we went through the cruise line itself proper or whether we went on our own and went separately.
Yeah. So as you've got older and you've started to now look back on this and realize the experiences that you've had, where have you got to in terms of piecing it all together? Like, have you how confident are you in what you think was going on, or is there still so much that's really hazy for you?
Well, when I try very, very, very hard not to talk about a flashback when it's brand new, or
Yeah.
if I do have a brand new flashback, I try to make it a point to say, this is new, this is unclear, I'm still trying to decipher it,
Mhm.
all that kind of stuff. I don't like to see anything as 100% positive because I don't think anybody can
Yeah.
say that they remember things 100% clearly. But it came down to a situation of either what I remember is accurate and this is really going on and something needs to be done about it and something needs to be done about it, or it's not accurate and it'll be investigated and it'll be dismissed and that'll be the end of that. But so far, there's been more circumstantial evidence that
Yeah.
it's accurate than that it's not. There's more people coming out, there's more information that's being proven. I mean, for God's sake, right now, I don't know if you know this on your side of the pond, but right now, in a big reason why some of these Epstein documents are being delayed and all that kind of stuff, and why it's only been such a small fraction,
Mm.
is because the Southern District of New York is withholding documents. I grew up in the Southern District of New
Yeah,
York.
yeah. Yeah.
So it's stuff like that that's like,
Do you think, because I look at this stuff and find it incredible, that even just like the headline of what was happening at this Epstein Island, you've got a guy who's actually been convicted of child trafficking. or I'm not sure what his actual conviction was, but it's clear that it was something along those lines. And then you have presidents, CEOs, like the who's who of world politics and geopolitics going to this place. It's like the most crazy headline ever. And yet, I mean, it's almost like how an insight into how sort of nihilistic the world has become. It's like for the average person, it's like, oh yeah, well, so so what? Like, has it amazed you how little an uproar there is? And I mean, this came out in 2017, so it's 7 and a bit years ago. There doesn't seem to be much justice or much that's happened as a result of it. How do you process that?
Honestly, in the past 7 years from when I first went public to now, it has been night and day.
Mm,
It's been completely different. The amount of support that survivors have gotten, the amount of,
bless you.
the amount of I hate using this term, but the amount of attention
Mm,
survivors have been getting and human trafficking has been getting, and the amount of people who want to learn more and want to know about the subject and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's huge. It's really it's a big thing, and I'm not the type of person that's going to be like, oh my God, like what when this next batch of the last 200 pages were released. I wasn't expecting anything big because, I'm
yeah,
used to it just, being the bare minimum that they give
it's under
us,
the
just
carpet.
enough to see if they can satiate us.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I
And
wasn't holding my breath, but they also made it very clear that it's just phase one and that they're
mm,
planning on doing more. I'll be looking, I'll be watching, but I'm not going to be glued to my computer waiting for the files to come out because, you know, it, we may never get all of it.
yeah. What's your position on Trump? And Musk, and because I know there's two very different schools of thought. There's your hardcore sort of MAGA guys like Trump's bringing down the deep state and he's going to expose everything, and then there's the others that are like you're just being played. Like I think there's theories that Trump was close with Epstein as well, and this is just more sort of theatre, throw people a bone, but ultimately just keep the show going on. Where do you sit on Trump?
The way I see it is that, if we know of them, if they are famous, if they are powerful, if they have money, that they've been compromised in some form.
Hmm.
Whether they did the deed with a smile on their face because they knew their fortunes were going to improve,
Yeah,
or whether they did it with a tear in their eye because they didn't want to hurt the child.
yeah,
At this point, I believe that if somebody's made to the upper echelons of society, they have been compromised in some form.
hmm,
And realistically, I don't think we would be in the position that we are in right now with survivors being able to speak and with all this discussion about the Epstein list and human trafficking and all that kind of stuff if Trump wasn't in office. I
yeah,
honestly believe that if Hillary Clinton had won, we would be in an extremely, extremely, extremely dire situation right now.
yeah,
Um, I'm not, let me put it this way. I support Trump as much as I think that he's supporting the people.
hmm,
If I feel like he's turning his back on us and he's not going to do anything about the child trafficking, then I don't want anything to do with him. But
yeah,
right now, that's the extent I support him. You know, yeah, that's pretty much what it comes down to.
yeah. So when you say that these guys in the upper echelon are compromised, what's your view now on what was going on, and is it just Epstein Island or is it a whole lot bigger than that? And what is the operation? Who's running it? What's the objective out of it? Or is it just it's sort of these sort of sicko freaks that have money and are doing things for pleasure? Or is it a lot more sophisticated than that?
From what I understood growing up was that there were 13 families.
Hmm.
And each of these families had their own hierarchy. They had their own goals. They had their own things that they wanted. They had their own, rules and guidelines and all that kind of stuff. And from what I understand, some of these families are literally just about power control. Some of them are about hedonism. Some of them, take pleasure in harming others. I knew of at least one that was extremely, you touch a child, you are gone. We want nothing to do with you. You are out. You're caught touching a child, you are out.
Hmm.
I remember there was a big scandal in that group too, where apparently, supposedly, a number of them had been drugged or drunk and were put in precarious situations and all that kind of stuff. And there was talk about abolishing that family. I don't know if they ever actually did or not. But some of them, it's all about control, destroying people. Some of them, want humanity to do well. Some of them
Yeah.
want humanity to flourish. But, unfortunately, there are more who are more interested in control and power. Who's in charge? I don't really think there's anybody really in charge right now. I think it's these different families. Some of them are aligning and, some of them are fighting and, all that kind of dramatic stuff but I couldn't really tell you who's in charge of the stuff at the top because that stuff switches around so much. I don't know.
Yeah. So it's really just sort of power battles at the absolute top of, what is sort of domination as the goal, which is, there's nothing new under the sun. That's a story of humanity, really. And then so something like an Epstein Island, is that just a thing for one faction to try to gain power over pawns in the game, or is it coordinated?
Think it was a situation where one or two factions did it and the other factions realized how effective it was, so they decided to pick up on it as well,
Hmm.
type of situation. I don't, it could be I don't know. I can imagine that's the case, at least for some of them. But unfortunately, when you're in a situation of, people are being blackmailed, on camera doing things with children, how do you combat something like that unless you come up with
Mm,
something as equally as awful to hold over somebody else's head, like over that person's head?
yeah.
So it becomes a sick cycle.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so where's it left you today, Jen, in terms of how you see the world and worldview? Obviously, you're putting a lot of your effort, which is really commendable in terms of speaking up and trying to fight it against it and do what you can with everyone else to bring it down. But are you able to find joy in your life? I mean, I don't know whether you're ever at peace with with what's happened, but where's it sort of left you as a human on the other side of it?
Pretty much where I am now is my life is about building awareness and advocating for those who have been through the system,
Hmm.
whether it's, dealing with Epstein's ilk, tangentially, or whether you were directly abducted, via CPS foster adoption industry and put into that kind of system. I essentially want to advocate for survivors and victims of child trafficking. I live near DC. So, my friend Keisha and I, were going to be heading into DC routinely, consistently to try and speak with Congress people, various entities and agencies. We want to do man on the street interviews, and we also want to do live streams of our interactions because I've seen a little bit about, parents who have dealt with CPS fraud going into DC, but I have yet really to see much about the adult children who have dealt with child trafficking and all that kind of stuff actually heading into DC. So what we're hoping to do is, let's say you have, hey, hi, Congressman, I've been to Epstein Island and multiple Lolita Express types of flights as a child. Can I speak with you? And if they're seeing that's being recorded and live
Mm,
streamed and all that kind of stuff, it looks really bad for them if they're walking away from somebody who's been to Epstein Island who's trying to talk to them.
yeah,
So we're hoping to kind of you know, we're hoping to utilize my experiences to try and build attention to everything and all that kind of stuff.
yeah. Does it wear you down? Is there a part of you that, I mean, you obviously want to bring attention to it, but is there a part of you that's like, I just want to go and live a quiet, normal life somewhere and never think about this ever again?
Yeah, there's what I want to do, which
Yeah.
is I want to get a cabin or a cottage in the middle of the woods and disappear and never see the rest of humanity again.
Yeah.
But then there's what I need to do.
Mm,
And the way I deal with it is I try to find humor in as much as I can, whether it's sardonic humor or ironic humor. I always try to find silver linings in anything. Something bad comes up, and I try to be like, okay, well, that sucks, but this is good part of it. And I tend to laugh at inappropriate things just because that's how I kind of cope with the trauma and stuff. But it helps me not get depressed. It helps me stay in the light, and so I mean that's also a big thing is trying not to. Every once in a while, I have those days where I just don't want to get out of bed, but the vast
Yeah.
majority of it, it's all right, new day. What's going on? What's the new level of chaos on the global scale? Let's get to it.
Yeah, makes sense. Have you got a sort of religious or spiritual outlook on it? Like what has this done for your view of humanity?
I am not of any religion. I believe that, I guess the best way to explain it is I believe that the universe or God, is an I believe that the universe is an intelligent entity that wants us, helping and supporting and healing each other, that it doesn't want us hurting. It doesn't want its children hurting. And the universe itself wants its children to flourish and prosper and do well,
Hmm.
and it doesn't like what's happening to the children right now, and whether that's God or something else, but that's more or less my view on it. And I believe in karma. I believe that what goes
Yeah,
around
I was
comes
gonna
around, and
I was gonna
I
ask
believe in
that. So there's
reincarnation.
yeah. Yeah, so your view is on horrific things like this, that there is ultimately sort of divine consequences for them that will play out over time.
Yes, I
Somewhat.
think
Yeah.
I think that unfortunately while their horrors are going on, they are able to get out of their consequences.
Hmm.
But due to the natural cycles of the universe, there's going to be fluctuations of good and bad always. And
Mm,
when good takes back over, their karma will be done.
yeah. And have you looked into sort of, the I'm sure you have, like the deeper history, because correct me if I'm wrong, but like child sacrifice and um sex trafficking in whatever form it took, is an ancient tradition. It's not new. I mean, I'm Christian. You read the Bible. There's enough of that going on throughout ancient civilizations. You think that sort of how much have you looked into that?
What aspects? Any specific aspects or just a
Just
child
like
sacrifice in general?
yeah, like I mean, the child sacrifice and the pedophilia and all this. That there seems to be. I mean, a lot of that seems to be sort of spiritual and religious in a way. That there are religious cults that actually do this because they think there's benefits for them.
They think that, from what I understood back then, is they believed that there was some kind of pure energy
Mm,
that came from the children, a different kind of energy and stuff like that. Like, for example, in my case, when I was younger, um, they got me good. They actually made me believe that the abuse was love.
mm,
They would tell me to show so and so how much I love them.
mm,
So for me, it wasn't like I didn't process it as abuse, it was a much younger child. So the energy that they're going to get from that kind of child who does those types of things in like, oh, if I do this, I'm showing how much I'm loving them, compared to, a child who's being, crying and screaming and all that kind of stuff, is
yeah.
going to be a different energy and all that kind of stuff as well. So it's yeah.
And so what's life now? You've got is it one daughter? Yeah. Are you still married or not married anymore?
Technically, I've never been married. I've just been with my husband for
Like de
17
facto?
years.
Yeah.
So I say I'm married, but we don't plan on getting married for a myriad of reasons. One of them being, due to my history.
Mm,
I don't know if something can come out of me at any moment, something that I can't control.
hmm.
So I want my husband to be able to take my daughter and leave if something that I can't control starts coming out.
Yeah. Have you how do you deal like is there ongoing like depression and psychological issues that need treatment or like it or do you try to stay away from any sort of pills or drugs or I mean how do you deal with that level of trauma and try to live normally?
Well, I mean, I'm lucky where I've been able to stay together mentally
Yeah.
to the point that, when I was being held political prisoner, they required me to get on medications. I got out. I saw an independent therapist, somebody separate than what they wanted me to see. And we were able to get me off the medications. And and actually last week, we talked about it, and she actually recommended and said that she believed that it would be okay to cut me down from my weekly therapy sessions down to bi-weekly therapy sessions, back to every
Yeah.
other week. So my therapist seems to think that I'm doing well.
Hmm.
Overall, I mean, the biggest, I guess, medication I use right now is I use cannabis to kind of keep myself stable and all that kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
other than that, just trying to embrace the good moments and deal with the punches as they come, but look on the bright side.
Yeah. What do you get the most joy out of when you're sort of away from doing what you're doing and campaigning? Have you got a little escape that you do that brings you joy now?
Bringing my daughter out somewhere she can run around and have fun.
Yeah. Yeah. What's it like now being a
That's
parent?
uh that's my favorite thing for pardon?
It must be such a crazy experience to be a parent now, having seen the worst in parenting your whole life. Like, I'm guessing you want the total opposite for your daughter.
I try. I try my hardest. Unfortunately, I feel terrible because I do a lot of advocating work.
Mm,
So I'm not able to be there, as much as I want to for her. But she's very, very smart. She knows. I tell her, mommy's work is bringing children home to their parents,
mhm.
bringing kidnapped children home to their families. And, when I tell her that, oh, this is who I work with, or, that kind of stuff, she's like, oh, you bring children home to their families. She understands. She understands why I'm working so hard and why, I'm always, busy, like, for example, my birthday, I don't wanna do anything for me. I want to bring Iris somewhere that she can just run around and have fun, so, we're gonna go to, like, a little indoor water park for my birthday so that way she can have fun. But, yeah, no, it's pretty much my life is I joke around that I'm working almost 24 hours a day because I will wake up, work, and sometimes even when I go to sleep at night, I'm having a podcast playing in the background.
Yeah. Have you have you had much support from interesting people? Like, has there been sort of higher profile people or groups that have reached out and tried to, amplify what you're doing or bring down the sort of
Not
system that
really,
they're a
no.
part of? No.
No, the not really, no. I've gotten far more support from independent content creators.
Mm,
I've really not heard anything from anybody big.
yeah.
I mean, I've even contacted the DOJ, the FBI, various government agencies. The only thing I've heard back from any of them, the only way I've been approached by any of them was when CPS told me to stop talking.
Yeah, wow. And so there hasn't been any shift in that now with the latest administration, just like,
They I I haven't heard anything from them. Not
yeah.
since I haven't heard anything from them since I got my daughter back, since I've been home.
Mm,
Nothing.
yeah. Has there been any other sort of Epstein Island victims that have had any sort of platform, or is your story consistent with all of them, that no one's really been given any sort of interview space or time with?
I know that there are quite a few survivors who have come forward. I know that there's one young woman who literally her whole thing is interviewing survivors and all that kind of stuff. And so I know there are a lot of survivors who've come forward. I don't know how many of them have been to Epstein Island. So I don't know, I can't really speak for what they remember or anything, but I have not spoken to any other Epstein Island survivors. I've spoken with other survivors in general, but not
Mm,
Epstein Island.
yeah. And what about the whole Diddy stuff? Do you think that's just much of the same, or is it different? Is it connected?
Honestly, yeah, I think it's more of the same stuff. It's them. I think it's whoever's trying to expose this, slowly showing how far out this web goes and like letting, people see how far this extends and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
we'll see if anything comes of it.
Yeah. What is your view on it? I think you answered before, and I think it's the right answer for one's mental state that, yeah, you remain optimistic, but you're not wedding yourself to any particular outcome happening. What do
I
you know,
like to use the term cautiously optimistic.
yeah. So what do you think, like, just objectively, based on everything that you've experienced and you've lived, so deeply in this over the last 8 years, and you describe it as night and day, like, it clearly is more mainstream now, what's happened than it was 8 years ago. What do you think what's your gut feel tell you? What's ahead with it? What do the next few years look like with all this stuff?
Gosh, I don't like to predict the future.
Yeah,
That's not my thing at all.
yeah,
What I'm hoping is that I'm hoping that the next few years are pretty much spent setting up, the next generations of now if Trump is going to expose this kind of stuff and if it's really going to happen, then I hope that the next few years is spent setting up the next generations of MAGA to make sure we're able to keep on the momentum that we have, to make
mm,
sure that the child trafficking is stopped, to make sure that it's cleaned up, to make sure there's transparency and accountability, because it can't all be done in 4 years.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I'm hoping that, something solid will be set up so that way we can really have a system where traffickers in general are held accountable.
yeah. Well, let's hope so. Well, Jen, I've really appreciated you coming on. This has been one of the more probably intense stories that I've had someone share, and the way you've been able to do it sort of openly and, doing it for a greater cause, as hard as it must be to relive some of these experiences. I totally commend you for that. And hopefully I can do a small part in telling your story and helping your advocacy. Anyone listening, where should I point them to go and follow up and hear from you and what you're doing?
I am most active on x.com.
Hmm.
So my username is x.com/CT Survivor 17, CT as in child trafficking survivor 17. I'm also on Truth Social. I think that one's truthsocial.com/Jennifer Guskin.
Fantastic. Well, I'll put those details in the show notes, and I'll let you get back to the work you're doing. Thanks again, Jen, and I hope we can stay in touch.
And thank you. Thank you so much for everything. Thank you to your viewers who are watching this and listening, and thank you to all of you who are helping to build awareness and fighting. It's because of you that we are finally going to be able to get transparency and accountability. So thank you so much.
Amen to that. Thanks so much, Jen.